Yes, I hope they can hear me. Good morning, members of the press. I must say that I am humbled to have been reappointed to the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, and in the early days of my appointment, I have already begun to assess what we are taking over. I've been speaking to the heads of department and getting to know where every department is, their constraints, what has been, what are the main issues that are critical to them functioning at a much more robust pace. And I've already had to deal with matters of addressing and collaborating on the matter of the COVID-19 response. But generally, I am willing and ready to work with much robustness in the sector of Amerindian development. You may be interested in some of the issues that very early that we will be dealing with on examining what is happening with respect to human resource. I have noticed that the ministry now has a complement of 144 staff, both assigned at the head office and within the hinterland regions. With respect to the performances and their assignment, there are some concerns. For example, within the last 8 months in 2019 and moving into 2020, there were some temporary appointments that were made within a sector or within a department in the ministry that has not been fully deployed. So we have staff within the regions that are not fully deployed and not fully deployed even now that COVID-19 has been affecting the general output and the general engagement of the entire country. There are some programs under the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs which I've examined, and these programs too have not produced the output as expected. And of course, the land titling project, the ALT project, is one of most concern, because according to the examination and analysis that has resulted from speaking to the unit, we have determined that within the last 5 years, there has not been movement and realization of the outputs of this project. In fact, in 2015, the unit that was engaged in dealing with land titling was disbanded. And when the new government transitioned, they took almost 16 months to get up and running a unit that would have been addressing the issues of land titling. Since that unit has been established, the low level of results is alarming. And therefore, what closer scrutiny of this unit has discovered is that within the last 5 years, there have been 3 extensions of the project. And the extensions were mainly based on approval of expenditures for operational cost, not actual real working to achieve targets and results according to the outputs as determined and committed and contracted with respect to that project. And operational costs actually covers the functioning of the administration of the project, including the payment of salaries. And so this is something that we will have to reverse. We also discovered that some of the reasons for the pause in this project was the fact that the board of this project has not met since 2019. In fact, in an entire year, they have not met. And if the board do not meet, then work plans cannot be approved. Similarly, budgetary allocation for specific activities and the budget for the ensuing period. So we will have to deal with not reactivating, but ensuring that the board, the Amerindian Land Titling Board, gets back on track with meeting and moving forward with respect to this. We have also discovered that other implementing, our partners in the implementation of this project, mainly Guyana Lands and Survey, that their cost and estimate for demarcation has escalated enormously. And that escalation of cost came about, or one of the factors was that the administration for lands and surveys estimate for demarcating and surveying of land has moved from 10% to 25% of one activity of demarcation. This has led to some discussion and possibly negotiation which was not resolved, and therefore UNDP, which is the partner to this, to the implementing partner with the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, have refused to disburse funds to Guyana Lands and Surveys to move ahead with demarcation. So overall, in a nutshell, there are two startling things. One, we have a unit that is fully employed with employees who have not been engaged fully, and they've been receiving their salaries with nothing to do. And we have the partners that, or stakeholders that ought to be working together with us, developing limitation due to their disapproval and lack of coordination on moving this project forward. I mentioned GLSC. I also was told that GGMC has continued to issue claims and approve permits for lands within the applied area in Amerindian lands. So these matters have been the real limitation to this project, realizing the output of completing their targets of titling of lands, providing extension and demarcation of the lands approved for Amerindians. So moving on to our support for young people. You would recall that in 2014, 2015, we have had a very important program which was directed to youths, building capacities, improving their capabilities, training, and attaching them to areas where they could contribute holistically and meaningfully to their community, and thereby engaging in community development. That project was popularly referred to as the CSO project, or the Community Service Officers. And that project was replaced by HACE. In examining HACE, we found that the output were not realized. There are a few successful entrepreneurial initiatives that have survived, but in the majority, we have found that the investment funds invested in this project or through this project has not been a success. And in fact, we have discovered that similarly like the ALT, there is a staff unit that is attached to the HACE program, which has not been actively engaged in anything over the year. And therefore, what I have found also is that there's been no work plan, there has been no approved budget, and of course in 2020, you know that we have not had a parliament approved budget, and therefore this unit had no allocation or provision for the unit to continue. But what occurred is that the ministry continued to accept the unit, and members of the staff came out every day to work. And it was only in June of this year that the ministry actually got approval for payments to be made to this unit or the staff of this unit through the tender board approving for them to be paid under the line item in the budget, which is referred to as others. So here we have another unit whose program had no work plan, no significant, no allocation at least attached to the program to cover the work program, even administratively, for salaries and so on. And it was in mid of this year that they actually were paid. In fact, I was told they were paid sometime just before I assumed office. And that is something that is worrisome because there's no work being done. Staff in a unit with no approved work plan or budget. And the activities, prior activities, have not borne significant successes in contributing to the development and support to our young people of the hinterland. And these are some of the issues that I've had to, well, have recently discovered and will have to be addressed, Also, there are some difficulties in staff who were politically appointed and form part of the ministerial secretariat who are refusing to, their ministers no longer there, and they're refusing to give up office space and even hand over assets that do not belong to them. I can clearly give you one of the most active case, which has been providing the permanent secretary with a little bit of headache, is the advisor to the minister who has refused to bring in the keys for vehicles and to also to hand over the keys to the office. He is not an employee of the ministry, and it is even worrisome when you're not paid by the ministry to want to lock down an office within the ministry, whereby the ministry at this moment is in transition, and we have to look at how we deal with our human resource issues, including the spread of how we arrange the various units and so on. With respect to what will the ministry be looking at in its immediate weeks ahead, we are in a pandemic, and that is the COVID-19 threat. The indigenous communities are affected, and you would have noticed that the ministry has very early begun to collaborate with the National Task Force, which is headed by Honorable Prime Minister, who has to immediately begin to respond in terms of attempting to quickly flatten the curve of COVID-19 so that Guyana will be able to be relieved with respect to this threat. The ministry immediately responded to relief supplies response, a request that was pending to the ministry and to the previous government for areas affected by COVID. And for the hinterland and particularly Amerindian communities, the effect of COVID can cause tremendous burden on the villagers because they are far away from the center of the services, including supplies. For example, we've had requests coming in before I assume the office from villages like Kurkabaru, Itabak, Tusaning, Bamboo Creek, etc., for support with respect to the threat of starvation in these areas because they were locked down and they had been affected by 2017 flooding. Their food security is still developing back to the standard level which they are accustomed to. It has not fully bounced back, and having shut down and affected by COVID, not being able to go over to the border communities, the border towns where they get their supplies from, has been impactful in a negative way. And therefore we have responded very urgently with some speed to relieve those communities that have been affected. The bigger significant role of the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs in addressing the stark neglect by the previous government to the hinterland is that we will focus within this year and beyond in improving the lives of the people. We will have to develop quickly mechanisms and responses to improving services which have badly been affected in those communities. And here I speak about medical services, supplies for our children, support to our farmers. Within the next 4 months, we will be looking basically at improving the conditions and the support for improving in these areas, because they are directly affecting people, families, children, the sick, pensioners, the vulnerable in the community, the most vulnerable. In fact, they're all vulnerable, but there are some sections of the village that also are most vulnerable. So we will have to deal with issues that support immediate intervention in the next 4 months to relieve some of these concerns and anxieties that have been affecting the villagers in the region, hinterland regions. So we expect to immediately provide some agricultural implement support so that they can support themselves and enhance and realize their food security issues. We will work collaboratively with the Ministry of Health to ensure that medical supplies are deployed to the affected areas, not by COVID, but affected by shortages and lack of medical supplies and drugs. That has been a 4-year or 5-year burning issue which still exists. We will have to look in some region, hinterland areas where the road network has been abandoned and traveling has become very difficult, which delay, which do not support easy delivery of supplies, goods and services to the villages. We'll have to quickly look to see how we can improve the road network leading to those villages. That will enhance as we probably flatten the curve for supplies to reach these areas. That is a matter which is affecting the villagers, particularly in Region 8. They depend a lot on supplies coming from Georgetown, and if they don't, not all villages have airstrips. And because of the lockdown, those villages where the supply land at the airstrip, they do not deliver any supplies to villages because they've locked their road down with gates and with other means like throwing trees across the road. So there's some locked off communities in this period that has to be addressed. Their issue has to be addressed. We will also be looking at the youth, support for youth, and the commitment of the People's Progressive Party. Civic government has been very clear that we will re-establish very quickly the CSO program. So we will see before the end of the year attention being paid to prepare villages to get back on track with the engagement of young people to support community development. So that is something we are working on right now, and we're hopeful that the preparation will take off expeditiously, and that before the end of the year we may be able to address some communities that are ready to receive the program. Because in COVID, you will know that it will be a very difficult and very risky situation to move in some regions and in some villages. So we will have to carefully select some villages who will be the front runner in this project that will come on stream. Of course, the issue of land titling is significant to the indigenous people, and we will have to get that back on track. So within the next 4 months too, we will be meeting with our partners very early and ironing out all the constraints that are affecting this project, so that before the end of the year, we will be in full swing and prepare to launch, not maybe relaunch, but to get back this project on track. That is the ALT. We will have to iron out the issue with GLSC and the disbursement of funds through the UNDP with respect to the letter of agreements that they have already signed in getting 3 areas demarcated. It's a tall order. Demarcation is a difficult field exercise, but they have signed on to do 3, and I am prepared to ensure that we unravel the constraints that are existing, so that we can get back this project on track. With respect to our welfare department, that too is constrained by COVID, and we are still receiving patients who come from the hinterland or referred to Georgetown for tertiary care, and we have to ensure that they are safe. That's a matter that is engaging our staff immediately, where they have to ensure that both staff and residents at the Princess Street residence are well taken care, that COVID-19 guidelines and restrictions are adhered to, and that we provide the level of preventative measures supporting the minimization of any risk of any patients or resident at that facility getting infected. We also have to look at school. You will have heard the announcement, but our facilities at the scholarship hostel and the tertiary level accommodation, currently that is at a very low level because of the school not being in session, and until school reopen, we will still have to carefully look at those facility. In fact, we need to look at the tertiary level facility. I am told that as soon as the rainfall, there is flooding in the bottom area and the apartments are flooded out, and this is a brand new building, only open in 2019, and the latter part or the mid of 2019, and I understand that they have already paid out the retention fee, because the retention is usually held to ensure that a building that has been constructed is properly functioning and there's no hindrance. But unfortunately, the retention fee for that building has already been fully paid, and we will have to look to see how we do corrective measures, probably in preparation for when it is in full, when it is fully housed, fully in use, as the school and the university and the other tertiary level institutions reopen and our students are coming back. I think that with respect to the project department that looks after presidential grants, among other economic projects, that project department has been almost diminished over the last 5 years. There's only 2 project management officer existing that has to look after projects ranging from ADF, Amerindian Development Fund projects, the presidential grant projects, school uniform distribution, among all the other things that happen project-wise in the 217 villages. They have not filled their positions, and the unit is pretty demoralized at the moment. The community development unit is demoralized even more. They have been, according to the staff, chucked in a little corner since 2015, and both the project department and the community development department have been minimized to a level where they no longer are involved actively in what takes place in the ministry, because the minister's secretariat took full control of all the implementing work of that ministry. And so we will have to correct that too, because the policy leaders will have to be able to trust the employees in the various departments to deliver on their programs and to roll out the program. So all in all, what I've inherited is a ministry that exists. They are large. The staff has actually, the number of staff has actually increased, but the output and the delivery of service have actually decreased. And we will have to reverse that. And that is one of the earliest roles that I'll have to challenge, reversing the delivery, the non-delivery of services to our people, and to get back on track the programs that are geared and designed to support Amerindian development in all the sectors: tourism, agriculture, youth department, economic activities, village economy transformation, services that is collaboratively delivered by the other ministries, local government with respect to infrastructure, the lack of support and repairs to bridges, the rundown village trails from connecting various villages. We have to collaboratively work to get those doing. Increasing the level of opportunity for communicating. In the interim, many villages, traditional form of communication was the radio sets. But what has happened is that they have not repaired them or replaced them, and there's no Wi-Fi in many of the villages existing for them to communicate. So we'll have to re-equip them with communication tools. In the interim, the ministry is working along with the Minister of Public Infrastructure to reintroduce the ICT project, because that's another project that we have already met on, and we're going to reintroduce that project to the hinterland communities, where every village will have their internet hub equipped with computers, a minimum of 20 computers, so that they'll be able to communicate not only for a socializing, but for emergencies and supporting production and agriculture and marketing, etc. So we have to deal with that. That is very lacking. Transportation, moving from one villages to the other. Classically, Region 8, the Tushao at the village level, there is no transportation. The regional level, at the regional administration, there are some transportation existing in the form of ATV. But when leaders, villagers want to go and buy goods and services for their village shop, or for themselves as a village, they have to walk hours and days to get to the center of supply. So we'll have to deal also with that, providing back ATVs for them to, in this period, in this early period, to be able to ease that burden which they have been reduced to, whereby they're walking hours to get from Kopinang to, or Kaibarupai to Kopinang to buy just 2 pounds of sugar, a packet of milk, some rice to supplement their local food. So we have a lot on our hands to do, and we have to work quickly. And I can assure the hinterland communities and the Amerindian population that the PPP civic government is preparing itself to ensure that within this first 4 months, that some of these matters which are immediate will be addressed. And in 2021, we will fully launch the major significant work that is staring us in the face. We have to reverse the neglect. We have to improve the lives of the people. We have to increase the level of opportunities existing that the government can provide through its intervention to the people that most need our support. So thank you.
Minister, ask them if they have any questions.
Do you have any questions?
Hello.
Any questions from those who are present here? No?
No.
Would you want to ask me anything about heritage? I didn't say anything about heritage celebration, NTC conference.
Yes, what's the plans for that, the upcoming NTC conference?
The commitment by our government was that we, as soon as we assume office, within the first month, we would have convene a conference with the Amerindian leaders. Because our government believe in consultation, we believe in engaging and working together with the Amerindian leaders. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic, has put us in a limiting position. So we are pursuing a proposal where instead of us bringing the leaders to the city, we are devising a plan to sub-regionally meet with leaders in the next 4 months, probably on a scheduled basis, so as to avoid putting them at risk or putting our staff at risk. But if the COVID pandemic flattens itself and we are in a safe position as a country, we are also preparing an alternative approach to have a conference probably in the latter part of the year. We're in the final quarter of the year, but closer to the end of the year. So we are looking at it in a two-pronged way, because we need to ensure that there's full engagement on how the government proceed with the intervention for their development. They have to be an equal partner. In the meantime, our staff is also reviewing the NTC report of the last year, which has not been fulfilled. You know that we have not had a 2019 budget, 2020 budget, but that has not featured into the budgetary proposal made by the previous administration. Having looked at the previous draft administration proposal for 2020, all the commitments or the requests made by the leaders are not included. What was included was $2+ billion for HAZE, which is just the youth component, devoid of support for agri, welfare, and the full works. So we are reviewing to see how we have reviewed it to see how it is captured in the upcoming 2020 budget, and also within the next 4 months when we move to Parliament to approve a budget for the remaining months of the year. So it means that that document provides the basis of full engagement when they were here last year, October. So we're going to work using that as an alternative to not meeting them in this period. I am meeting the NTC chair early next week, so we will update him on the approach for the remaining months of the year. So we have not totally shelved having a conference, but it is dependent on how COVID-19 pans out in the remaining months of this year. With respect to heritage, again, they have not moved ahead since January to when I assume office with respect to dealing with heritage. And therefore, our initiative that we're developing within the last 2 days or so as we're going through our preparing our budget, we have proposed that we will have a virtual activities, and therefore before the end of next week we will aim to put out there how this virtual activity, what package will form part of the virtual celebration of the Heritage Month.
Uh, Hello? I'm not sure if you can hear me. Minister, can you hear me?
Yes, I told her, we're hearing you. We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Look like you have to speak
So
inside.
you mentioned earlier that the staff of the ministry had increased. Could you say, and you said that you found that some of them, they're not fully deployed. Can you explain what do you mean by that?
Let me give you an example. The CDOs, that's the Community Development Officers, they have increased from a number of about 13 to 22. And since they have been employed, most of them have not been provided with for example, they're not mobile, so they can't do any outreach. And they are on a month-to-month contract for the last year, basically, the year and more, including recently some of their contracts continue to be renewed under in this year. And they're not doing anything because they're not deployed. In fact, I am the representative, the political oversight member of parliament in the last 5 years for Region 8, and some of the CDOs were actively engaged in campaigning with their ministers and campaigning on their own, because I was campaigning myself in those areas, but they're not deployed with any responsibility for working among the villages.
Okay. So given that this is what you found, what is the next course of action? Are they going to relieve their duties? Are you considering?
We're considering that they have no mode of, in some instances, no ATVs or mode of transportation to get them around. It's COVID. We affected by COVID, so people are not in and around the villages. They can't move, and therefore they're on temporary month-to-month. We may have to relieve them, other than, you know, pay them to do nothing. And as the CSO program come on board, they could be assumed back into that program when it is relaunched.
How many of them do you expect to, or how many of them?
I'm still assessing the human resource requirement, matching it with what we have to do, and we will then make a determination. But these are some of the discoveries that we have made, where there are quite a few people who have not fully been engaged, and there are no work plan, no approved budget, and they are at risk of probably not even being paid. For example, the Hays, they had no budget for the entire year. They had no project work plan approved by the ministry or tender board, and they were without salaries, but they came to work every day. It was only in July, the end of July, around the end of July, that without a budget, without a work plan approved, they facilitated payment for them, but they have not been deployed. They're not working.
Okay. You also spoke about the land titling institute. I wasn't too clear because you were breaking up.
Okay.
Is it that you're saying that the project was put on hold because the GLSC had raised the fee for demarcation?
No, that's not the only factor. The factor was that there were three factors that affected the delays and the need for extensions without any approval for funding outputs and only approval for funding operational costs of the administrative body, which is the unit. So over the last 5 years, since October 2016, there were 2 extensions, only where operational cost was approved. Nothing, no capital support for the actual exercise to proceed. So we have seen over the last 5 years that staff were fully engaged at the unit, but they were not engaged in realizing targets, but they were paid. We will have to reverse that. So there were matters such as the changeover, the transition from the PPP civic government to the APNU-AFC government. They disbanded the functioning unit. They took quite a long time, 16 months, to reinstate a new unit. The capacity of those people in the unit had to be built. They were new. They were not even experts in the area. And therefore, what happened for them to continue running the program without working towards realizing targets, approval was given only for operational cost. In addition to that, the minimum work that was achieved by this unit, which resulted in 5 reports for demarcation or 5 approval for demarcation within the 5 year, only 3 letters of agreement was signed between the Ministry of the then Indigenous Peoples Affairs and GLSC. And since the signing of those letters of agreement a year ago, these 3 villages have not enjoyed being demarcated, or they have not realized the target of demarcation because the exorbitant cost for demarcation, which was put up in the estimate, was beyond the scope of what was budgeted for those areas, and the negotiation yielded no early resolution. It was only last year, late last year, that some level of fatigue stepped in, and the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs went ahead and signed this agreement. And since they signed the agreement with the high exorbitant costs, UNDP was not in agreement with what transpired, and they have withheld financing those three demarcation. So I will have to now ensure that there's some resolution to this. So the 3 agreements signed between the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, that is the unit, the LTR unit, and the Lands and Surveys, Guyana Lands and Surveys, that we resolve this matter, and that UNDP also, who is the implementing partner with the ministry, that we resolve this. So it is matters which have panned out and have not support the achieving outputs. So I'm sure that this could be worked. We can overcome these hurdles. So they were slapped with loss of capacity, trying to get back on track over the 16 months period, then not being effectively able to negotiate and work as partners with the other commissions, and the minister not being able to have reports and recommending approval for activities, and cabinet not getting them to approve. So the whole project went on a, what you call it, we usually use the word pause because nothing came out of it in the last 5 years, nothing substantive. So that is where we are. So we'll have to correct it, definitely. Yes, please.
Under the previous administration, there was the 5Ds, the buses, which was active in the hinterland, the buses, boats, bicycles. Would this new government try to basically have like an altered version of this, or would continue something along this route of providing like boats to these hinterland communities? You spoke earlier about transportation woes, breakfast, buses, etc., for ease of
support to what is happening.
Yeah.
To remind you, the transportation for school children is an initiative of the People's Progressive Party. If you go back to our budgetary provisions for quite a number of years, you will find that in our capital budget provisions, we have always catered for improving school children transportation by supplying them with school boats, buses, pickup where they're used. With respect to the school, the breakfast or the lunch, the meals that were introduced to the schools, that's a PPP civic venture. The breakfast that we speak about under the 5Bs never materialized. None of the indigenous schools or the schools found in indigenous villages do not get breakfast. They remain with only the lunch and the meal that was provided by the program run under the PPP civic government. So in this budget, we have put in to continue to support school children transportation. In this 4-month period, we put up a proposal. Not for everyone, but within the confines of the 4 months that we have before us. Because we have to look at how can ministries, including us, use the money that we will be provided for through the parliament, approved by the parliament within 3 months, basically. Because if we go to the parliament to get the budget approved, it takes a couple of days and probably weeks. So we're looking at spending, taking a 3 months period. So we'll have to be realistic. So we are addressing school children transportation needs in that period too, in this period. So it is not the 5Bs. You go to the hinterland, the majority of hinterland communities were not provided with boots, were not provided with boats, buses, bicycles, neither the breakfast. There were very few communities that benefited, but not in the majority. So you can see the David G buses riding around in the city, but go to the hinterland, you wouldn't see them. You will see maybe in only 1 or 2 communities where they have. I'm speaking about hinterland areas where 90% of Guyanese Amerindian villagers reside or are located. So it was our government in the past that introduced support for school children, providing bus, pickup, ATV in some instances, and even providing flights to move them from villages to the dorms where they go to secondary school. We've been on that for a while, and we're continuing it.
As a telecommunications minister.
by the pandemic.
Minister, I'm just trying to find out what is the position of the hinterland program
The what?
in terms of the children who were in Georgetown at the time when the COVID-19 outbreak took place. And what is the position of the schools in the hinterland where children are normally housed in dorms? How prepared are they the reopening of schools with the pandemic?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, currently at our dormitory, there is no student at the scholarship dormitory. There is one student at the tertiary level accommodation facility who was writing an exam. So when COVID-19 pandemic was struck and schools were out, the students were sent home. With respect for preparedness for COVID-19 and the reopening of school in the hinterland areas, the National Task Force is working collaboratively with the Ministry of Health, Amerindian Affairs, local government, and of course education and social services with respect to addressing how that preparation roll out. You would know that we are working very assiduously to contain the spread of COVID-19 from engulfing the hinterland villages. So far in Region 1, where over a couple of weeks it was a hot spot, we have been able to temper that risk. So the Moruca sub-region now is almost free of COVID infection. That was the hot spot. We are looking at containing the COVID risk of spreading in the Region 8, and therefore our relief supply does not only address the food security of the affected families, but it provides a measure for not allowing, to keep the villagers in other than heading to the borders to buy supplies. In Region 9, similarly, as it relates to the school, the Minister of Education her plans are to work with ensuring that there are some instruction materials that will be prepared if there's a prolonged threat and if school doesn't reopen as expected within this year. Because you would know that there's been an announcement that school is not going to be reopened at its usual time, and they will look at it maybe even for the rest of the year. So the Minister of Education is working on ways to assist. While it may be a bit easier here on the coastal or for coastal villages where there is television, Wi-Fi, and means of getting lessons easily dispersed, we will have to look for the hinterland. She'll have to prepare for the hinterland a different approach, and that's why the materials definitely will come in very handy if school will not be reopened this year. But we can use the radio. We can use there are some spots in some areas that have internet, and I'm sure that she can package the material and send to some of the communities to aid. But many of the communities are COVID free, but we're still worried that we will pan out very shortly in providing testing opportunities in communities that do not have, that are not affected or known to be affected, to ensure that we are covering that end too, as it relates to the response to flattening the curve.
In terms of, I think it's sort of been mentioned before, but I just wanted to get an update. priority in terms of connectivity, ICT hubs in the hinterland. Remember, we're in this COVID-19 pandemic, and they maybe have need for like virtual learning and so forth. Who knows when this with COVID-19 would pan out. So in terms of connectivity and ICT, have your ministry collaborated with the telecommunications sector, you know, in devising a plan to strengthen that?
Well, there's a committee that is meeting, and the Minister of Education is responsible for that level of intervention with our collaborative recommendations and so on. That's it. If there's no other question, may I thank the media, both those who participated virtually and those who are with us physically. Thank you very much.